And joining us in studio is LindaFehrmann, licensed professional counselor, and she is with Provident. And Linda, you not only work with people who may be in a different state, but also you have dealt with this personally. Your son committed suicide, and I am so sorry to hear that. It must have been a horrible thing to go through.
It was a very devastating loss, yes.
One of the questions that I think a lot of people are struggling with, the reactions in the wake of such a high-profile suicide have kind of been all over the board. But one thing that I would like to ask you as a counselor and somebody who has personal experience with this, does somebody who is completely themselves, of complete sound mind and body, just decide to end their life?
No, absolutely not. In many cases, there's a lot of things going on. You can compare it to a cup of water. You have a cup of water that is completely full to the brim. You add one more drop, and the water, it spills over. It was not that drop that caused it to spill over. It was what was already accumulated in that cup. So when a person has thoughts of suicide, it can be, one thing. It's usually a traumatic event with feelings of loss that the person experiences. But a lot of it has to do what was already in that cup that caused, it to overflow and cause them to have the thoughts of suicide.
Does the person usually have a blurred vision of reality?
They have distorted thinking. Right before, many people will talk about being in this black hole, that they cannot see beyond the black hole. And they begin to see suicide as their only option. They have a lot of distorted thinking going on. They begin to see themselves as a burden on others. They begin to think families will be better off without them. They begin to think they are totally alone and isolated, and that they have no support system. So they begin to see suicide as their only option.
Now, I've worked with some families who have had family members commit suicide, and one of the things, a mom in particular, had said, I had no idea. I didn't know. And she felt she should have known. And then that must be a difficult thing, too. So for families who may be grappling with something like this, would you know? How would you know?
You don't. The average person does not recognize warning signs for suicide. So what we have to do now, we have to start being proactive rather than reactive when a suicide occurs. We have to start training people to be aware of warning signs and risk factors for suicide.
Well, Linda, what are some of those warning signs?
Some of the warning signs might be if a person is, say, giving away possessions, if they are talking about suicide, if there's any kind of changes in appearance, they're not taking care of their appearance anymore. Maybe they're eating too much, sleeping too much, or eating too little and sleeping too little as well. Any kind of changes in their normal behaviors, anything that raises suspicion with someone. And how you figure out what's going on is you have to ask the person. Ask them what's going on. And don't be afraid to ask them if they're thinking about suicide.
I think we also still have quite a stigma in our society
Absolutely.
about mental health. And,
Yes.
over the last couple of years, it's felt like maybe we've made some progress in that, but maybe not enough because people don't want to say, I'm depressed or I don't feel myself.
Right. And, to reduce that stigma, first we have to look at the language surrounding suicide. We have to stop saying committed suicide because that makes it sound like suicide is a crime, okay? We prefer to say someone died by suicide rather than committed suicide.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is it natural for people who are relatives or friends of the person who has died by suicide to try and find a quick explanation?
Oh, absolutely, yes. It's very normal for the survivors to want to blame someone else, and then a lot of times they'll take that blame and put it on themselves, where in reality, the suicide had nothing to do with the survivors.
Causation is something we need to know. We need to know,
right, as people,
what led to the event.
We do. And that's all part of the healing process, is the need to know why.
Now, do you often talk to the families and relatives? Because I would imagine if this happened in my family, I would need some serious help myself, because it is a traumatic event for everyone involved.
Absolutely. I work a lot with survivors of suicide. Provident has support groups for survivors of suicide. I facilitate one of those groups. I'm also part of what we call a survivor outreach team. That's through our local chapter, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And we will go into a home after a suicide has occurred and meet with the families in their home.
You never get over it, do you?
You get through it.
Do you?
You'd never get over it, but you get through it. Mm-hmm. You can survive.
A lot of woulda, coulda, shoulda?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
It's just terrible.
Yes.
I should have had this in front of me, but maybe you know offhand. Is there like a suicide hotline in our area or our state?
Yes, there is. Providence Life Crisis Services has
thank you. See, I knew you would know.
a 24-hour crisis line. The number is 314-647-HELP or 647-4357. There is also the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That's a toll-free number. Again, 24 hours, 365 days a year. That number is 800-273-TALK or 273-8255. Our crisis center through Provident also answers the lifeline as well.
Suicide is the second leading cause of death among persons 10 to 24 years old in the United States, and it's increasing.
Yes,
10 to 24?
Yes.
10?
Yes.
Yeah, and 6 veterans daily die by suicide.
Right.
Isn't it just, that's off the charts?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Linda, thank you very much for joining us today. We sure appreciate the information you shared with us. Mm-hmm. Really valuable.
All right. Thank you for having me.
And I'll
Thank you so
post those
much.
crisis lines as well, just in case people didn't have a chance to write those down.
Do you want any more?
LindaFehrmann, licensed professional counselor and a master's in counseling, certified grief recovery specialist, has worked for Provident since 2007. Joining us today on the Voice of St. Louis, KMOX.